it should be designed to encourage everybody to cut pollution. And more specifically, you should pay more into the fund the more you emit.
Welcome back to BVTV. I'm George Hay, EMEA editor of Reuters Breakingviews, and I'm joined again from West London by Hugo Dixon, Breakingviews' founder. Hi, Hugo. Good to speak to you again.
Lovely to see you, George.
We were both at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, and I think we can both agree the countries of the world made minimal progress in ways to mitigate future climate change by cutting greenhouse gas emissions. But there was some progress on another contentious area. The world's countries have agreed to set up a loss and damage fund where they pay into a pot to help those in dire straits right now because of the impact of global warming. You've been giving a bit of thought to how that might work. What do you think?
The most important thing is that in setting up this fund, that we do not slacken our efforts to fight climate change. And that's what you were talking about. And there was disappointment on that. In fact, rather than slacking efforts, the fund should be designed in such a way that it encourages everybody to cut their greenhouse gases. And it's fair to say that this fund, although the communique said we've set up a fund, they haven't done anything of the sort. They've set up a committee, or they've agreed to set up a committee to propose how a fund would work. But to some extent that means it's a blank slate, which is or I think you've called it an empty bucket in some of your own writing, and that's an advantage because it to one extent, because it means that one can design it potentially in the right way. And so my key point is that it should be designed to encourage everybody to cut pollution, and more specifically, you should pay more into the fund the more you emit.
Right. And
you should take more out of the fund the less you emit. I mean, there's quite a lot more complexity to it than that, in which we might explore, but that's the core principle. And that's therefore designed to align the incentives of helping those in dire straits with what I think is an even more important objective, which is stopping the planet frying in the first place.
Right. So the initial way in which it would work, just kind of expand on that a little bit.
Okay, well, so if you look at how you would pay into the fund, I mean, okay, you can't obviously look at literally how much greenhouse gas a country has emitted, because it has to be adjusted for population. Right. I mean, India is the fourth largest emitter, but it's only but it's largest equal in terms of population, and on a per capita basis, it's actually way below the average.
Right.
So what you do is you make an adjustment for per capita, and then the second thing you have to decide is, when are you measuring the pollution from? I mean, some people want to go all the way back to the 18th century at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah. Well, what's the reason why you wouldn't do that?
Well, there are several reasons why you wouldn't do that. One is that at the time, countries and industries that were doing that didn't know that it was contributed to climate change. The second thing is that that greenhouse, particularly carbon dioxide, only stays in the atmosphere. Well, about half of it dissipates after 30 years, and other greenhouse gases even faster. So. Anyway, I've said, for the sake of compromise, but you could come to another date, I've said 1992. And the reason that 1992 has a special significance is it was the date of the Rio Earth Summit. Yeah. And you could say that that was the date when the international community formally recognized climate change as a problem. Right. And it also happens to be 30 years ago. And so I'm saying, for sake of argument, let's say start it from 1992. We'll work out whether a country's per capita emissions are above or below the average. And then to the extent that they're above, the more above they are, for example, America, Canada, Australia, big in terms of not just absolute amounts, but per capita above, then the more that they would pay into the fund. And you can do a calculation on that basis. And what it actually shows is if you work it up to 2019, which is the last date we have readily available data for all countries, it takes you to America would be responsible for 44% of what gets paid into the fund.
Right.
Followed by the EU at 13%, and then Russia at 10%, and quite far down would be China at 4%, because although it is a tiny bit above the average, it's only a tiny bit above the average, and even though it's vast emissions, it does have vast emissions, they're actually on that period only a tiny bit above the average per capita.
Okay, but then you have this a further wrinkle whereby you don't want to just kind of base it on 1992 to up to now emissions. You also want to think about what might happen in the next 10 years or further than that, right?
Well, indeed, that's where the incentive comes in, because you make it a dynamic formula. And so you say, that would be the formula that, say, the one that I laid out would be for a disaster that happened today, you know, like the Pakistan flooding. But if something happened in 2030, you know, a storm, a flooding, you know, fire damage, whatever it is, you'd then measure the emissions up to that point in time, and you'd redo the calculation. And so that would give an incentive for countries to cut their emissions from now, because then they would be landed with a smaller share of the bill. In fact, and probably the bill will keep going up, because the climate damage, unless we do something very dramatic, the climate damage will keep rising. And so if you use the sort of data projections from Climate Action Tracker and make a few calculations, then if you look to 2030, which is you do the projections, you see that America is still way the highest, but it's come down to 39% of the bill from 44. China has gone up from 4 to 14. So it's because whereas the rich developed countries have been, you know, to more or less, they are cutting, not as fast as they should. And America certainly not as fast as Europe. China is still increasing its emissions.
And then there's a similar principle in kind would kick in terms of how you distribute money from this fund to whoever's going to get it. Just talk us through that.
So for example, I mean, this is all, again, designed to encourage incentives, but also it's designed to be fair, that if the more you are below the average, the more you get compensated for the damage. So take India, for example. India, up until from 92 to 2019, although it's the fourth largest emitter in that period, it's only 29% of the world average. And so you take the 29 off the 100 and you get 71%. So it would, under my suggestion, it would get, for if it suffered damage, it would get 71% of it compensated. But then again, that's dynamic, because India is growing its emissions through this decade. And if you redo the maths for 2030, instead of getting 71%, it would only end up with 67% by 2030. And so this is, and then of course by 2040 and 2050, the numbers, when in fact the really, really big bills for climate damage might hit, unless we do something again dramatic to stop it, the percentages will have shifted further.
Okay, well, we'll leave it there, but thanks for joining us, Hugo. That was very interesting. That's been BVTV. Thanks for watching.